Hello, everybody. Welcome to the October 18th instance of the Gateway API Gamma community call. As a reminder, this community call is governed by the Kubernetes Code of Conduct, which boils down to be nice to one another. If you've got questions, you can go to the Kubernetes community GitHub page to learn more. This is the last Gamma meeting before KubeCon, which is exciting and scary depending on your involvement in KubeCon, but really happy to be here. You know, the first Gamma meeting was back in July, and we've made a good bit of progress since then, having some great conversations. So I'm excited to dig into even more of these discussions today. Let me go ahead and share my screen, and we'll begin working down the agenda. As a reminder, we have an open agenda, and I'll post a link to that agenda here in the chat. If you've got topics, anybody can add a topic here. So please feel free to add agenda items as they arrive. And also add your name and company, if you're representing a company, to this attendee section here, just so we know who is part of the community. So with that said, if there are no questions or comments at the beginning, I'm going to go and hop right into our agenda for today. Mike is here. Awesome. A recap from last week. If you're still able to, I can also take that because I know it's late in your time zone.
Yeah, I will be mostly off camera this meeting, so if you want to run through that briefly, but I'm happy to kind of fill in any missing context though.
All right, sounds good. Thanks. So yeah, this was I actually having to miss last week's meeting, but apparently Lynn Sun had a great suggestion, which I am very much in support for, of doing a recap from previous meetings, since Gamma does have alternating time slots. I think doing a recap will be helpful for folks. So, looks like discussion was mainly around north-south gateway integration with east-west routing rules. So, part of one of the big goals of Gamma is to try to, use Gateway API for east-west routing, as well as north-south routing. And our initial GEP didn't immediately tackle the integration piece. It looks like that's what we're focusing on last week. There was some desire to scope the ingress gateway operator persona set to be separate from the service mesh owner operator persona. Apparently, those are different roles for in different places. And this is, there is there of mesh-aware routing, but it's difficult. So the actual implementation details are difficult to do without deploying a sidecar next to your gateway, or treating your gateway special. Route delegation might be a path forward, but there's still some exploration being done here. There's a document here in the chat about ways to go about exposing mesh services through gateways. I've taken a look at this and left a couple of comments. Please, everyone else, if you've got interest in this integration point, please take a look at this document and let, I think John wrote it, let folks know your thoughts. Does that kind of cover that topic well enough, Mike, or you've got other thoughts?
I think so. So I wrote this doc. It was based on conversations I had with John previously, but it was basically a 1 hour brain dump. So it is very much an early draft that is actively seeking contributions for explicit use cases or fleshing out either of the two proposals or any alternatives at this point.
Okay, awesome. Thanks for that clarification. I was not sure who married the duck, so appreciate the clarification there. It sounds like this doc, as well as kind of the other thing that was talked about, Auth-Z proposals. I was part of. I was there for some of the previous discussion on Auth-Z. We are, Gamma is relatively, new. Like I mentioned, our first meeting was in July, and so we've done a lot of good work in nailing down some definitions, trying to get folks on the same page vocabulary wise. But we're looking for champions. We're looking for folks who can, outside of just Mike, John, and myself, who are willing to kind kind of invest time to drive some of these things forward. I'm very aware that KubeCon is next week, and that's going to take a lot of folks' time. But after we kind of come back from KubeCon, it would be great to try to find some folks to own some of these different questions and to bring those their investigation and discoveries back to the meeting so we can discuss more. Yeah, that's kind of the recap. Any questions or comments on that for folks who either weren't there or who have interest here? Can we enable comments on the doc? Mike, I think if you own that, that's going to be a you thing.
Yes. I will open up the doc so that anyone can read and write.
Great, thank you. And thank you for raising that, Costin. Last call. All right, cool. Next, Flynn had a topic, but Flynn is not here. But apologies for if I butcher this name. Lizan?
Yes.
Hey, you want to talk about some of Envoy Gateway thoughts on auth-in/auth-z?
Right. So basically, that's I attached a document there. That's a current draft proposal for Envoy Gateway about the authentication policy. The goal here is I want to talk about this to the Gamma API initiative. I think we have couple of folks overlaps, and we have goals overlapping as well. So it makes sense to get some thoughts from folks in this group, and potentially we can do some common API between Gamma and Envoy Gateway. So we can support same set of extension instead of developing our own different API spec for those authentication that makes sense for both.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing this. I agree that this is a place where we should try to collaborate. Someone who was on last week's call might need to correct me here. I think one of the questions that we asked early on with Gamma when it comes to auth-in and auth-z is, how much of that should Gamma prescribe via a resource? How much of that should be a set of patterns and a set, just merely be a set of patterns on how to implement a gateway API flavored auth-z policy. And I don't remember, I think the jury was still out on that one. I do think, with Envoy Gateway being an implementation of Gateway API, it absolutely, if Envoy Gateway is going to have a resource, we should work to make sure it at least follows any patterns that we're thinking of prescribing. Mike, I saw you come off, turn your camera on. You were there last week, so please correct me if I'm wrong here.
Yeah, I think where we've kind of ended up at in terms of a starting point is assuming a baseline of service account for auth-n. So for how services are able to authenticate themselves. So leaving that out of this aspect, at least for now, maybe exploring how to make it modular, spiffy, whatever, as alternative identities in the future, but not focusing on that yet.
Yeah. That was what I heard from Flynn as well. So I think that lead to the next question is what the credentials is tied to each service account. Are we using job tokens or X509 certs, or how we describe them? The authentication policy for Envoy Gateway is primarily targeted to authenticate the user incoming. The current proposal is targeted northwest traffic, but I do also worked with on some east-west before, so that I think we need to figure out those primitives, and we can discuss about the policy.
I know. Okay, that sounds right. We've talked in the past. Thus far, we've kind of tried to keep like MTLS X509 relatively out of the Gamma APIs on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
I know that, and there's other gateway API on the north-south end discussions about backend capabilities and X509 certs on the north-south case. And it's not quite clear how they come together yet, because so much of what Mesh does is transparent proxy. We're going to, in most cases, a service count as a projection of identity, and then use that to set up policies. I haven't thought all the way through, okay, what does it look like if we elevate that to an API level? What does that look like from the user experience perspective? That's absolutely a conversation. I'm willing to have that conversation now. If you've got comments or something you want to add, please, use feel free to use the raise hand feature or of Zoom to chat. But yeah, anybody have other thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think I had a look at this because on my gateway for north-south stuff, and I think it looks great. I do think so, Lijan. I think to say it a little to say what Keith was saying in a slightly different way. One of the things that John Howard has pushed for pretty strongly that I've actually come to agree with is that it's really important that we leave the how do you determine the identity used for service to service auth up to the mesh implementation, like whether or not it's MTLS or something like that. I mean, now that I work for Isovalent, I also have a vested interest there because Cilium uses a completely different identity for service to service auth. I think I think that I have a gut feeling that this is may end up being like the backend capabilities discussion, where part of what we're doing here is sort of saying, for the north-south case, it's kind of about saying, regardless of any magic, when you get to the process that's actually running in the backend pod, like, how do you do auth? That's the sort of the thing you need for the north-south case, because like it's unusual that you would have a north-south implementation that does a lot of magic, whereas the magic is the norm for east-west implementations. And I think that's probably one of the biggest impedance mismatches between the north-south cases and the east-west cases, is that north-south, most of the time people want to be very explicit and not have any magic, and the east-west case is the opposite. People want magic more and don't want to have to be very explicit about everything. And I think that's one of the things that's a bit tricky to design around. I really like your proposal for the north-south stuff. I don't know how it will work for the east-west stuff, because most of the time in the east-west case, the user is not you're not doing user auth anyway.
Yeah, like, it's more magical.
Yeah. So sorry, Costin was next.
Yeah, pretty interested in this topic as well. I think one thing that we need to address in particular, given the integration between gateway and Gamma, is how do you delegate? Because in many cases, the authentication happens in the gateway for traffic from the internet, and sometimes it may be passed, the credentials, the JOT can be passed as is, sometimes not, because it's an access token or some other type of token that the pod will not be able to verify. So some mechanisms to delegate identity will need to be defined between gateways and the trust model also between gateway and Gamma, because if any delegation of identity will imply some requirement of trust establishment between gateway and Gamma, and are pretty complicated topics, but it's important to think about them early, because it's very difficult to make it work without those.
That's a really good point.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So from Envoy Gateway side, I think the first target is the JOT authentication. I think that's probably first. And as Mike is saying, that they're interested as well. So Yeah, I would like to get in more comment and feedback on this document to how to fit this, because Envoy Gateway is primary as the north-south gateway, but like, for example, the litigation should be taken into consideration. And so please read through this document and give me some feedback, and we can probably have more discussion next week during KubeCon and in the following meetings.
Awesome. Appreciate you bringing this up to us. Sounds like the action item then, like you just said, is to read the doc and provide feedback. Looking forward to the conversations that we'll have around this. This is some interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Last call for any other discussion items?
Yeah, I think I want a +1 on this for Nick's comment. I think different platform, cloud provider may provide different kind of authentication. Say, for example, on AWS, we use IAM role. So basically every part you can associate to it had its service account, and service account basically, and we'll use it to assume a role. That's how we get authentication. And another thing is, instead of using mutual TLS, you need to have certificate. We use a SIG-V4 as a way of presenting the identity of a client, which is used, it's integrated into the cloud provider on AWS. I just want to point that out. So instead of say, okay, SPIFFE is the only way, which you need to have certificate authority, all those kind of things. Well, AWS, you get it for free, use SIG-V4, and all the parts will have the service account along with the IAM role, and we'll get all these credential by the platform.
Got it. So that makes sense. Go ahead, Costa.
Can you repeat? I'm not sure I understood. So on AWS, what do you get? You get the identity as a token, or how?
Yeah. So today, the way I think I put in the link to the chat is how it works. Is basically you associate your cluster to your open ID or different identity provider, and from the pod perspective, if the pod will give this a temporary what you call the service account, right, which is a token to a service account. And what it does is basically it will assume role. The pod will get, because of this account, it will get this temporary key, which lasts for 15 minutes. So when on the service provider side, when they receive the packet from this pod, it has this particular token assigned the packet using SIG-V4. And the service can go to the internal, what we call the auth runtime server. We will present this, okay, this is coming from this guy with this particular signature. It will come back to see who that guy is, what's the account, what's the privilege. Then you can define your authorization policy to see if this guy is allowed to do this. Are you coming from the full? Or are you coming from the bar? If you're coming from full, you can do read and write. If you're coming from bar, you can only do write. So it's basically used, it's pretty well adapted. You get it for free when you're running on AWS. And AWS customers are familiar with this kind of things. They use IAM policies, they write the root. So it works for Kubernetes and also for easy to everything.
Yeah, I agree with it. Something that we should support. I mean, I don't know if instead of or in addition to is a correct solution, because MTLS has its own benefits in terms of efficiency and it's done part of the handshake, and both of them are well-established solution. But I think
I think this is just another alternative, at least for the AWS customer. They just want to use what's provided from the cloud. Yeah, instead of bringing their own, certificate authority, all those kind of managing them themselves.
Yeah, Istio, for example, suppose both, you can authenticate either with an OIDC JOT token, or you can authenticate with MTLS. Both of them are supported. you can either do policy inline or you can call an external authorization policy like the IAM. So it's not very similar, but it needs to be both. That's my
yeah, I agree. Yeah, we shouldn't exclude one or another. It should allow both. That's why I think Nick's comment right on the spot. It's hard to enforce one for East-West. It's going to have different. Yeah.
Yeah, +1 to Mike's comment in the chat. Thanks, Lemon. That's awesome.
Yeah, I as you were talking, Lee, when I was taken back to my time as a DevOps engineer, and we used that exact functionality on AWS, and it would be fantastic if that were just like natively done in Kubernetes through this API. So everything that's been said, this is something we want to try to make sure is configurable at the cloud provider level. Okay, awesome. That's thinking about like how we push this forward. Post KubeCon, I'm sure there will be another conversation about this after KubeCon is over. But I think that it sounds like authorization and authentication is it feels like the place people are wanting to spend the most time. Like I mentioned earlier, looking for other champions to push these things forward. So you can maybe try to parallelize this work. We've got a couple of different work streams at the moment between continuing down the routing APIs, so exposing the integration between gateway and service stuff with HTTP route. We've got authorization policy. I'm sure that TCP route will be something that naturally follows this work stream. So lots of chances, just want to take a second and highlight, lots of chances for people in the community to get involved if they would, if they desire. So, all right, any last things before we move on? All right, one last thank you to Lizanne for bringing this to Gamma. I'm looking forward to the collaboration between Gamma and Envoy Gateway on this.
Yeah, looking
all right.
forward to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so next topic is mine. I wanted to get a quick update on the HTTP route gap PR and just kind of talk about where we are on that. Like I mentioned, we're canceling this meeting next week for KubeCon. And we've got some comments on here that have had a good bit. There's been a good bit of work on it since I last commented. And then I got Sean's Healing, who posted in Slack as well as here in the GitHub PR for posterity. Sean's got kind of a different approach towards how we should go about doing HTTP routing in Gamma. And so I've commented on this. There have been a couple of different comments. If you've got interest in a different kind of work stream towards HTTP route that you want to take a look at and circle back after probably after the PR is merged, then the link is here. It's also in Slack. I don't believe Sean is here, but if you've got thoughts, like I said, add to this comment. But yeah, going back to the original PR, I honestly am not sure what the current state of this is right now with all of the different conversation. I love the conversation's great, but I'm not sure where we are. So Mike, do you want to give, I'm sorry for calling on you so much, but do you want to give a kind of brief update of kind of the status of the PR?
The brief update is I have been preoccupied with other work and have not had a chance to look at this in the past week. So I need to get up to date on the current conversations and probably update this in response to anything there. So I need to get back to this. Hopefully that can happen before the next meeting that we have after KubeCon. So we'll not get to it before KubeCon. We'll might get to it before KubeCon, but hopefully we can discuss and kind of resolve things and move forward once we get back from that.
All right. Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, again, really, I've called on folks in meetings, and I'm sure others have as well, to take a look at this this PR, and y'all have. So really appreciate the thoughts and all the work that's gone on, on Mike's part and on others' part, communicating, being in this call, shaping this up. Like, this is the first like concrete Gamma PR. It's proposing making changes to APIs and such. So this is very exciting. Very exciting for me, and hopefully for y'all too. All right. That is actually all that we've got on the agenda today. Check the comments right quick. Talking about identities. In lieu, if you've got any other agenda items, then please add them. But if we don't have any others, I have no problem going into this mesh services through gateways conversation and fleshing it out a bit, and talking through how folks might expect that to work. We can also go back to Envoy Gateway authentication policy. Does anybody have a preference? Or we can end the meeting early, because I'm sure it's a week before KubeCon. Lots of folks might have stuff they want to get back to. So what would y'all like to do? Anybody want to throw out a vote? Tough crowd. Okay, so chat. The critiques. Good idea. Yeah, we can talk through some of these critiques if that's what folks want to do. There is a lot here. Sean did a pretty nice job of going through and getting together lots of all his thoughts. I am not. I've read through it. I'm somewhat familiar with the arguments, but I'm wary of trying to represent them to everybody, because they're not my arguments. So I'm probably going to say, let's not discuss these right now, since Sean's not here to represent him, like, his perspective, and wait for a time where either Sean can be here synchronously, or for folks to comment on the document asynchronously.
Yeah, that seems fair to me. I will say that, like, having read through this, my general like response to it is that the model of a service producer owner being able to have traffic redirected transparently to, or sorry, opaquely to the consumer. So the consumer should not have to opt in or change their configuration, is a desirable property of most mesh implementations. So where this document uses the word like hijack, I would say that is actually intended functionality. And I want to go back and add that to the goals of the GEP that's currently pending right now, to be more explicit about that.
Yeah, that's a plus one for me. My general thoughts on the doc can be found in this comment here, but I echo what Mike said. I feel like users at this point have been using meshes for over 6 years. Not all users, but there's a large segment of mesh users who use the way things work, and you creating a kind of unified service resource and a controller to manage that feels like it's a lot of work to maintain a certain level of correctness as far as what the service resource means in Kubernetes that doesn't actually gain as much except breaking the mental model. And Nick, as you're fond of saying, you really only get to really break that model once. And I'd rather not spend that capital right now on something like this. Maybe if the service resource like gets broken up and becomes more flexible, like that would be the time to do something like this. But now does not feel like the time to rock that particular boat. So if you disagree with me, or if you agree, or if you just have other comments, please add them here in the doc. I work with Sean. I'm sure he'd appreciate it. Any feedback that you give him. Okay, so I opened that twice by accident. I'm deleting way too much stuff. where is my, here it is at the beginning, first tab. Getting lost in the tabs here. So I'm going to, from lack of opinions, I'm just going to go to this exposing mesh services document and start working on it. If you don't care, then you can drop. And if I'm by myself, I will just end the meeting. If you feel strongly about going to authorization policy, I'll go comment and I can go to authorization policy. Oh, Nick, you have something to add? Oh, never mind. You answered the question.
Yeah, it's all good. Thanks. Yeah.
Cool. All right. So going into this gap. So this I am a bit more familiar with. So I feel, and you know, Mike's here, so I feel comfortable kind of chatting through some of this. The state that the current HTTP route gap leaves us in is, okay, cool. There's a way for users to create HTTP route resources for their services and have a mesh implementation use that resource to send traffic to that service. We bind to the service resource. It's a kind of an intuitive binding. It's what users would probably reach for. Great. But how does that interact with gateway services or gateway HTTP route resources? How does that delegation, it's overloaded, but how does that work? The point is made here in the doc that north-south gateway resources should not implicitly follow mesh routing rules, right? This is something that we kind of deferred a lot in our early conversations with HTTP route to get to where we are, and I'm glad we did that because this is complicated. But there's that question, right, of, okay, should gateway implementations pick up on any HTTP route that's in the namespace cluster within the scope that it can see and forward traffic based on that? And this, you know, doc makes the point that no, it shouldn't. And I, for one, actually agree with that. There's, you know, elevating that, implicit mesh routing by the gateway, I feel breaks the abstraction layer between the two different directions, levels of routing that exist in the cluster. I see Costin, you just added a comment. Do you want to speak to that instead of me trying to butcher my way through reading it?
No, it's okay. I mean, we can discuss it offline.
Okay, we can discuss that offline. Cool. And then we've got some top level goals. I messed that up. There we go. Got some top level goals here. That's, you know, as a service owner, you want to expose your service outside the cluster while applying the same routing and traffic splitting rules as inside the mesh. So this is the really common use case, right? This is the, I want my service to be routed, traffic from my service to be routed the exact same way, regardless of whether the traffic is coming from outside the cluster or the traffic is coming from inside the cluster. And then secondly, as a north-south gateway API implementation, you shouldn't be required to understand or add support for any kind of east-west gateway API routing, mesh routing. So classic cases like Contour. Contour shouldn't have to understand gamma east-west traffic routing in order to route its traffic. Costin, go ahead.
I'm curious, is this a requirement, a goal for the user or for particular implementations? Because, I mean, as a user, do I get any benefit if I use a cluster where the gateway implementation is that cluster is not aware of the mesh implementation, and or is just a way for implementers to, you know, goal for implementers to not have to support different meshes? In how does it benefit?
How does it benefit the second point? How does the second point benefit the user? Okay. So in my mind, the reason the second point benefits the user is it allows users to pick the solution that them. So for example, let's say that I'm on a cloud and I can get supported Nginx ingress by using Gateway API, right? We're talking in the future, Gateway APIs everywhere. And I can get Nginx supported. Great. I want to use Nginx because my cloud provider is going to support. And I want to use a different mesh. Why would I? It helps the user because then the cloud provider does not have to, or rather, that's the wrong way to word this. The user doesn't have to rely on a cloud provider or somebody else to understand mesh for their gateway implementation. They can pick whatever mesh implementation they like. You decouple those. and so that it gives users more freedom. Maybe you're in a mesh like open service mesh where you can, in theory, bring any ingress gateway to the OSM, and you've got your choice out there because they're decoupled. Does that make sense?
That comes with a cost, basically, because then they will have a lot of complexity. So basically, they will not know what works or doesn't work. And as we add authorization, another more interesting part, it will become quickly very dangerous, because if it's not, I mean, if not our routing, maybe it's not a big deal. But when we start to add authorization and other things, I don't know how well it will. Maybe it will be okay. I don't know.
I think the authorization question is significantly different enough for the, well, yeah, I think authorization use cases are usually different enough between the east-west, north-south use cases to where, especially for the common case, users, it won't be too bad. But that's just my hunch. I could be wrong. Reading through the comment through the chat here. One advantage to keep the decouple could be native, like re-encrypt from gateway into mesh. That's a good point from Mike. And then John says, I think there are use cases for applying both routes or just applying one, possibly, or on a per route basis. I'm guessing both routes being like gateway and mesh routes. In theory, possible with different backend ref config. Okay, so a straw man would be like service front end, service backend. Yeah. So that's what kind of was one of the questions that came up when we were designing the HTTP route resource for east-west. We were, I think Nick, Nick got the Miro board of the different ways to go about it. And if you bind a service, okay, if you've got a gateway that's got a backend ref to a service that is a parent ref of the HTTP route, mesh is reading, and this kind of nested chain thing here, because you're using different roles of the service resource. And I think that there is possibility for that, but I think we probably want to be, if we want to enable that use case, we have to be very specific of what we're not going to allow cycles wise. And I think we do that in the HTTP route get. I think we only allow, there are rules there that you can't have a parent ref that is a backend ref for a non-gateway resource, so you don't get into any levels of, or we have to just allow. Somebody, if someone's coming, help me out. Okay, new caller, oh, sure. Finding policy. Yeah, so we do something somewhat similar in Gateway API. We have a separate envoy like cluster for the ingress that we allow traffic to come through. I don't know what John is trying to say here. What he means by core, yeah, I'm just not sure what that's considered. And to be clear, by also mean this TLS between gateway and service.
I think there, John's just trying to say like the sort of the basic thing is what we say in the doc, and then but you can do some other type for backend and then maybe get a different behavior. But then that would be custom implementation support, or custom support.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense to me. Cool. Yeah, I agree with that. One of the benefits about the way Gateway API design, you've got these different levels and toggles to use with as far as like what support model you want to do for beta or alpha, extended, core. The doc has some API suggestions, and one of them, which is very intriguing to me, I think this is the main one, to allow specifying service and gateway parent ref on a HTTP route. This would, on HTTP route specifically, one way to allow this is to move the host names field from HTTP route to parent ref to allow for different host names and different parent refs. This is very intriguing to me. I understand what it's trying to model. I really wish I should go back and add an example here. I think
Yeah, I'm not sure I follow why, because the service reference actually has a name. I mean, it's parent ref service name foo, and that's a host name basically.
I think this is so that you can have so that you can have a host name, a different host name for the exposure via the gateway, and a host name for the gateway for the exposure via the internal east-west exposure. Because remember that the HTTP route has like a hostname field. So like if you set the hostname field to like external.com, then that would be expected to some extent to be the hostname for the internal one as well. If you've got one HTTP route that's bound to a gateway and a service, you need some way to distinguish between the different host names. I would probably say that in my mind, it seems like it would be better to have that handled at the the rule should be don't use hostname in one of these HTTP routes, and let the listeners on the gateway sort out the external host names for you, and then just don't mention the host name would be sort of my preference there.
Yeah, I mean, from my experience, I mean, usually the host names are important to know what to accept, and I always thought that it's implicit that if you attach a route to a service, the service.namespace.svc cluster local, it's implicitly added to the list of host names, and any other list of host names are for access from other, because a service can be called with multiple names, and you control what names you want to allow. But I don't think that there is a useful use case for specifying that the routes as a parent only for a particular hostname. I mean, if the hostname is listed in the list of hostname for the route, who doesn't? Nobody cares who's calling. I mean, it's. I don't know if I'm making my point or confusing you.
I go back and forth on this. I get what you're saying, Costin. Like, if you're routing the service, then like, who cares what if it fits in the host name, any of these host names, then just let it go to the service. At the same time, it's
a very big change to the HTTP route for the north-south use cases, because the host name being present in the main part of the HTTP route spec for the north-south use cases is like, that was the result of months of wrangling, having exactly how that worked. So I'm extremely reluctant to remove that field without like an extremely compelling case. Like that has a really important use case in the north-south use case. I mean, again, this is one of the problems of trying to use the same thing for two purposes. I mean, you don't have a host name, but you do have a section name. So like, I mean, it's very possible that you could, you could name the listener in the gateway by the host name somehow, and then you use the section name to pick the host name. It's hacky, but that's, I mean, we're trying to use the same object for two things. Like, it's going to end up hacky because the things are slightly different, and we're trying to use like the same object to perform two purposes.
By the way, the gateway also has a list of host names. So it's if you don't have staging example.com in the gateway, it's not going to attach. So
if you have the host name in the main part of the route, yes, that's how it will work. The host name matching rules are a little bit complicated, because if there is no host name specified at the listener, it means match any host name on the route. If there is a wildcard host name, you can have the single label at the start be a wildcard, which means you could have star.example.com on the listener, and then having staging.example.com or prod.example.com in the normal hostname field on the route would mean that the thing would attach. And also you can, and obviously the other option is you just leave it as star, or you just leave it as implied, and then have the host names matching on the thing. Or you can just not. You can also, it's also allowable in the north-south spec to just not have any host name matching at all, which by default means match all host names. So the like, it's kind of, if the outside address of the staging gateway in the example you're giving, it points to staging.example.com, then just parent refing that HTTP route to the staging gateway will get you that thing. You don't need to specify the host name. So I think that having specifying the host name here is one of those things where you might not really need to do it. It's just that the app needs to understand that it needs to be good about not expecting only certain names and using the base URL that it gets rather than stuff like that. So I'm pretty strongly -1 on doing on removing the hostname field as it exists right now from HTTP route. There are a lot of implications, and it will deeply screw up the north-south implementation. For all of those reasons.
So one proposal that we've discussed is not just remove it entirely, but rather moving it from HTTP route to the parent reference object. So in north-south, that actually gets us the flexibility to bind to different host names on different gateways. If you're binding the same HTTP route to multiple gateways, say like a staging and a production one, something like that. So it gets us actually additional functionality in north-south, in addition to potentially being more flexible for mesh use cases. So that's one option that I think we should at least write up in more detail.
Yeah, I think it's worth writing it up in more detail. It will be adding another place where you can put a host name. Because functionally, it's going to be very difficult to remove that field now that HTTP route is beta. Moving the field means removing the current field and putting a new one in, right? Effectively. And so doing that level of change in a beta resource is complicated. We will actually need to do a V1 beta 2 for the resource to do that because it is a breaking change. I think it's worth writing up the reasons to do it and the advantages we would get, but it's a significant cost, so the advantages are going to need to be pretty big.
Cool, that makes sense. Definitely keep that in mind. Capture that.
Yeah, I mean, also to just make sure we're clear, what would probably happen is that we would probably add host names to parent ref in addition to and do the code deprecation thing, and then remove it later. That's also got some, mental cost there because which host name field do I use? But that's also an option. So sorry, I cut you off, Costin. Go ahead.
No, I just raised my hand. For reference, I mean, in Istio virtual service, you can just specify the name of the gateway and mesh. And I don't think any user complains that we don't have this kind of granularities that you need to pinpoint a particular hostname in a particular gateway that needs to be referenced. So maybe we need to do some evaluation of how many users need this kind of accuracy and maybe add it after we have enough users to conform. I don't know, but requiring it would be catastrophic because it's very, very difficult to manage this and deploy it when the route doesn't usually know. I mean, you have Helm or you have some other, routes come with application. You deploy a chart, you have 3 services and routes. And, it will be very difficult to manage with Helm or other tools.
Yeah, the how do these resources get deployed is another really good question to ask yourself. What does the resource look like in the Helm chart that deploys an app, right? Is a really good question to ask yourself when you're thinking about this. That's one of the reasons why we have the host name available in the HTTP route, because some people absolutely, there is absolutely a use case where people are like, I want to be able to do star.example.com, and then I want to be people to be able to attach their foo, bar, baz services to that listener and have it only attached to that one, and you want that thing there. There's absolutely a use case where people want that functionality. I think that a far more common use case for simpler things is going to be that you don't specify the host name in the route at all, and you specify the host name in the listener. That is actually a better way of doing it, and you should only use the host name in the route, if you really need it. As Dave P says, that's how Knative works. Knative needs it for routing reasons. And that's why that flexibility is there, to enable people to do sort of a more magic self-service kind of setup. But like, I don't think that's ever going to be the primary use case for how the API is used. And like, I think that doing it that way makes some of that stuff more complicated. I think one of the advantages of Ingress was that you didn't, is that you kind of, a lot of the time you would deploy the app with the service and then add the Ingress later. Dave.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo a good frame of mind to have with designing some of these APIs is like, it's not just a user manipulating them. Think of it as like Knative, we have our own control plane that will produce routes. So we definitely want, for example, routes or host names in the HTTP route. And we want that type of fine-grained control.
Yeah,
the other thing to think about as well is like, you could say the gateway might be configured by some other operator, and someone might install Knative themselves and want to piggyback off of that existing gateway, and having their own, being able to just create HTTP routes is, lets users use Knative on a cluster where they don't have access to the north-south traffic.
That's a great call out. Completely agree there. Lots of good feedback to take as we kind of design this integration. We've got 5 minutes till, and I think that feels like a really good conclusion. Unless anybody has anything else they want to add, I'll give you 5 minutes back.
I would like to make one request of everybody. I know you all, I'm hoping that you all have some time to meet up and talk Gamma stuff while you are at KubeCon. If you could delegate someone to try and keep some notes and stuff so that it'll be easier to catch those of us who sadly can't be there then that would be much appreciated.
One related comment to what I discussed earlier, it will be very useful for most proposals to consider the implications on deployment on Helm and other tools, because we find it's very difficult to do it right post fact and puts a lot of difficulty on the user. They will need to know the gateway, in this case, the gateway name. So it's as a user, I want to deploy an application with Helm with a single click. Now that's not possible because you need to find out a way to go into that cluster, figure out what gateways are installed, what host names are pointed to that gateway. And after you find out, which probably requires some permissions because you cannot list all the gateways if you don't have permissions, and you only have permission to your own namespace, then you need to figure out what DNS is set up and what is actual gateway configuration. So you can put it's becoming very, very difficult to maintain and to do this kind of one-click deployment for applications. And I don't know.
Yeah, this is definitely a problem with the way that we with the way that we did the HTTP route gateway binding, but like that that process again was like extremely involved, and that was the result of a long train of negotiations. So I think it's the best that we can do. I agree that it sucks a bit for Helm things. Like what I've always hoped is that we as a community can standardize on some like common gateway names, like an external gateway, like a name of external or something like that, being like, this is the default way that you like get external access. And so having something like that would be sort of really nice, because then you can just have the routes default to the external gateway, and then you change them afterwards if it doesn't work, right? Like, but I think that's probably the best we're going to get to do. But I 100% agree with you, Costin, that it's super important when we're doing this design to try and keep in mind what's the experience for someone installing a new app in the cluster like.
Yeah, for gateway attachment, it's just an example. I mean, I know we can do that, but as we are adding more stuff that fits into the same categories that sucks for application developer, and I think this one kind of fits into this pattern because DNS names are very difficult to know ahead of time.
Yeah, agreed. Like, I think even if you can configure it, we should say to people, hey, probably don't unless you really need to. Like, don't use this field unless you know you need to. Yeah. Sorry. We are out of time.
No worries. We still have 2 minutes, but yeah, those are some really good thoughts. I wasn't really myself. I wasn't really thinking about the Helm use case, but you make some very strong arguments there from a persona's point of view and just a developer experience. So I'll take another crack at we have, where's my doc? I'm going to move back over here. Yeah, as a reminder, next meeting next week is canceled for KubeCon. That means because of the way we've got the schedule lined up, that means the next Gamma meeting will also be at 3 p.m. Pacific time because they're actually 2 separate meetings on the calendar. And before I forget, because I know that's going to be confusing, let me go ahead and at the date. It's going to be like November 1st. Maybe I'm off by a day.
I think the 1st is right.
Tuesday, pull up my calendar. Yeah, November 1st, 3 p.m. PST. So tell everybody as a reminder, I had a post in Slack. If I'm even awake after KubeCon, I will post in Slack to remind folks. So it'll be at this time, not next week, but the next week. All right, thank you all again. Looking forward to seeing some of y'all in person at KubeCon. For those of you who won't be able to make it, we will have you in our thoughts. And we will take notes if we do have a working session. I don't know that we've got a formal one, but that has 2 working sessions. I'm sure we can craft and talk about. All right, y'all take care. Have a good rest of your day, night, whatever zone you're in.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.